Hello everyone, my name is The Demented Salad, and this is going to be a baseline tutorial for the mechanics and gameplay of Resident Evil 7, which can be useful for any category when speedrunning. Unlike Resident Evil 5, this game has a native new game option, so if you want to start a new game run, you simply press the new game button. There isn't really much else to it. When running RE7 on PC, there are several choices of versions that you can run. The fastest way to speedrun RE7 without modding is by using the 0D version of the game, which is the Japanese censored version. It saves around 28 seconds due to censoring, and unless you live in Japan, it can only be accessed via the Windows Store, where you must swap your PC's region to Japan and then download the game. If you plan on seriously running the game and gunning for top times, then this is generally the best option. Otherwise, you can use the Steam versions. Steam offers two different versions, DX11 and DX12. DX12 is the most recent version of the game and allows us to use a cutscene skip mod with RE Framework for specific speedrunning categories, but it is generally slower than DX11 as the way the engine works was changed slightly in the update, causing some strats to be different or harder. If you'd like to skip cutscenes, then you can use DX12, but if you want to use DX11, it can be accessed via the game's properties and betas page. There's also another category that I want to touch on very quickly. This game also has a no guest house category that more or less functions the same as the full game run, except that instead of starting at the beginning of the game, you start the run just before the first Jack fight. I'm going to leave a link in the description to a document that shows you how to set up a no guest house save, just in case you want to try and run that instead. I also want to take a quick moment to talk about languages. Technically, English is the slowest language to use, and more or less the rest of them are all negligible on how much time it saves. Spanish, however, is the fastest way to run the game, although it still only saves around 2 to 3 seconds over English, so unless you're really gunning for records or you want the time save, there isn't really much point in swapping to it. Now that's out of the way, let's talk about FPS memes. As mentioned in my RE5 video, FPS has affected a wide variety of things since Resident Evil 4, including faster loads, animations, and even changing hitbox sizes. While you can't swap FPS on the PS4 generation of the game, you can on both the PS5 generation and PC, and it's used a good few times throughout all of the runs in every single category. This game is the only one in the series that has an uncapped FPS limit for PC speedrunning, and it's been changed to 120 FPS in all subsequent RE Engine games to help curb unfair competition, as generally the higher FPS you have, the faster you will be. The next thing I want to talk about is controls. Unlike RE5, where a mixture of controller and KBM is the fastest way to speedrun, KBM is the definitive fastest way to speedrun the game, as movement, inventorying, and basically everything else are much faster. Controls wise, you can really have them anywhere you want to and what you feel comfortable with. There's also a quick turn in this game, and while it isn't used on KBM as simply turning the mouse is faster, it is used on consoles. Now onto some main game mechanics. The first mechanic I want to talk about is blocking. In RE7, Ethan is able to mitigate most damage from attacks by blocking them. This is a pretty baseline mechanic that's explained in the game, but I wanted to mention it because it does lead into a couple other mechanics in this game, and it can be pretty useful. Leading on from that, the next mechanic I'm going to talk about is Cheapshotting. Unfortunately, this isn't a mechanic that goes in the runner's favour. Essentially, a cheap shot is when an enemy will quite literally do an instant attack with no wind-up or animation to indicate it. Even worse, a cheap shot can hit you multiple times, and the higher FPS you have, the more likely it is to happen. There are some signs to when an enemy might cheap shot you, such as multiple enemies in an area not cheap shotting you, and the more you play, the more you might be able to recognise these patterns of enemies and when it might happen. Now, you can block cheap shots if you're able to react fast enough or you think something might cheap shot you, and this could very much save time in your run, especially if you're on Madhouse, as multiple cheap shots could literally one-shot you. However, note that enemies can sometimes just ignore your block for both a normal attack or a cheap shot. Another useful mechanic is reload cancelling. As the name implies, reload cancelling allows you to skip part of your gun's reload animation. This works for every single weapon in the game and is achieved by blocking as soon as you see your ammo go up in the bottom right. It can be very useful as you're able to start shooting again, sometimes much earlier than normal, and you're able to get extra damage off that you wouldn't normally be able to. You can also do this by swap cancelling, which is done by swapping to a different weapon at the same point you would do a block cancel and then swapping back to your weapon. While on paper this is slower than block cancelling, you're able to do this without losing any movement speed, So in places where you're running around or you're not really able to slow down, you can do this and still be able to shoot fast. The next mechanic I want to talk about is item pickup aim cancelling. Normally when you pick up an item with a pop-up, it will completely stop your forwards momentum after the pop-up. However, if you aim in as you pick up the item, you'll be able to keep your forward momentum after the pop-up. This is only useful in a few places and is a very small time save, so don't worry about this too much until you're very comfortable with the run and trying to go for world record. There is also another way to do this without a weapon, which is called walk cancelling. This tech is PC exclusive, and is done by double binding the crouch button to an additional key. You can't be holding shift while you do this. If you're running, just before you pick up the item, press both crouch buttons which will make you walk, and then once you've picked up the item you should still be able to walk without stopping. Then you can press shift and begin to run again instantly. Quickdropping is another very useful mechanic that is used quite a bit throughout the run. Essentially, when you normally drop off a ledge, Ethan has an animation where he steps over the ledge before falling. However, if you walk off a ledge in line with the drop, this animation doesn't happen and you fall off the ledge instantly. Another way to achieve this state is by walking up to the ledge normally, but just as you reach the ledge, you crouch down over the edge of it and it will have the exact same effect. Just as in RE5, checkpoint resetting is also a very useful mechanic. While there are only several checkpoints in Madhouse, there are a good few checkpoints in Easy and Normal that we can use to teleport ourselves or enemies around by restarting the checkpoint just as we hit it. If you hit a checkpoint while you're slowed, and you restart the checkpoint, it will also increase Ethan's movement speed back to its original state. In this game, you can tell a checkpoint has happened by the circular spinning icon in the top left of the screen. The final and probably the most important mechanic is quick shooting. Quick shooting can be achieved with any pistol other than the Albert or the Magnum, and it's done by alternating between scoping in your weapon, shooting, and then scoping out and shooting. It is extensively faster than shooting the pistol normally, and allows you to pump out a lot more damage. Quick shooting is relatively easier to do, but it does require a rhythm. It's easier to quick shot very fast on lower FPS, so you will see some FPS swapping during certain fights. And with that, I believe this sums up the first part of the tutorial. Thank you guys for watching. If you guys enjoyed the video and found it informative, please make sure you hit the subscribe button down below. If you're interested, you can also follow me on my Twitch channel, which will also be in the description. If I do any tutorials for the speedruns of this game, this video is going to be the very first video in the playlist of it, so you'll always have access to it no matter what category you're doing. I hope this helped you, and happy running.